welcome to the third session of Talks About Pope Francis. I think you all know who I am. I'm Vern Gooden. Some of you are a little bit newer to me. I think I may have met you at coffee, but I'm not sure. I'm a parishioner here at St. Joe's. This is the third monthly presentation on our new Pope. New, I still say. He's been with us for over a year, I think. Join us, Sally. But we've had one in September by Monsignor Krebs, and that was a larger group. We were set up in a circle for that one, as I recall. And when I came to that one, I thought, holy cow, what am I in for? Because I knew I was doing this in 2 months. And then last time we had Father Alongo, the crowd was still good, a little bit smaller. And I kind of expected it might be a little smaller tonight, and that's what I'm seeing. How much can anyone learn about Pope Francis? Well, it turns out quite a bit, I think. The first two sessions, when Father Krebs, and he prefers to be called Father Krebs, he's told me, so that's what I always refer to him as, but Monsignor Krebs likes to be called Father Krebs. And his presentation was about the man that is now the Pope. Who is this man? Jorge Mario Bergoglio. I don't think I said the last one, it was Bergoglio. Who is this man that is now Pope Francis? And he spent quite a bit of time talking about his life in Argentina. We all know that he was a cardinal, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Before that, he'd been a parish priest in various parishes in Argentina, all of them serving poor people. Probably poorer people in those parishes than we're accustomed to. It needs to be a little closer? Okay, I'll try to get a little closer.
I don't even know if it's on.
Oh, can you hear me without it?
Some can't. No.
Some can't? Okay. Is it on?
No. We turned it off because you weren't sure if you were
Okay. I used to work on radio once, can you believe it?
Things
Okay.
have changed.
Now, is it on?
Yes.
It is on.
Can you hear me better?
Yes.
A little better? Okay. Getting back to Father Krebs' presentation on the man who is now Pope, a parish priest in Argentina who came up through the ranks, became eventually the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires and Cardinal, one of the electors of the Pope. Before then, he was serving poor parishes in Argentina, so he certainly knows what he's speaking of when he talks about things like mercy and the poor, and he saw people's troubles in his parishes, so he has a sensitivity to that I think we still see pretty clearly when he speaks now in his role as Pope. Then our second presentation in October was by Father Alongo, and he spent the whole night talking about the name Francis and what the significance of the Pope's choosing the name Francis might be for this papacy. And I won't go through that whole thing because he's talked for almost an hour and a half, I think, but it was quite interesting. Who was Francis? He talked about when Francis was, well, before he was a monk or whatever, he had a vision. Jesus spoke to him and said, Francis, rebuild my church. And Francis thought, well, his parish church needed some repair, was in disrepute. Maybe we can fix that up. So he started fixing up the local parish church, and then he realized, no, what Jesus was saying to me was much bigger than just fixing my own local parish church. He was talking about the entire church. It needed rebuilding because there was some controversy, some corruption that had come about in it. It needed fixing. And so how did Francis go about fixing that, what he thought needed to be fixing? By focusing on the poor. Francis just decided that he would be one of the poor. He was from a rich family, but he gave all of his wealth away and became just a poor man serving God. He and Claire were similar in their mendicant ways, call them, and the poverty that they experienced really attracted people. This spirituality, it can be called a spirituality from below. I don't know if that's an odd term to you, but theology from above tends to look at God is above us. God exists in somehow way above us. It's so far above us we can't really understand what it is, but we know it's there. That's a theology from above. It's like we have to almost go out of ourselves to try to experience it. A theology from below spends its time living with people on earth and being with those people, finding right relationships with the people that we live with. This is what Francis was all about. The fact that our new Pope chose the name Francis implies for many of us that he wants to align himself with that vision of serving the poor, having people at the center of the church, not the church and its hierarchy and all of that stuff, but the people of God would be at the center of his church. So those were our first two sessions. I think most of you were probably attending those, so this isn't new to you. Tonight I want to take off on a little different approach if I can, but before I do that, whenever I teach a class, and some of you have taken classes from me in the past, so you know this, I always like to start out with a little bit of a reflection to put us in the proper frame of mind for what we're going to be doing tonight. And I found this reflection online. It's one of the things I get every day. I get this online daily reflection. This is from Father Richard Rohr, another Franciscan. Now, our Pope isn't Franciscan, he's Jesuit, but he is Francis, and he modeled a lot of what he did on Saint Francis. And this is another Franciscan priest that's talking about something that I think really sounds a lot like what I hear Pope Francis wants to do in his papacy with the church in the world. And so this reflection, I think, will set the tone for tonight. And it's on your handouts, but you don't need to read it along. If you want to just kind of close your eyes and become a little quiet and let all the distractions of the day kind of pass away for a moment, I'll read it to you in just a sec. He's talking about our encounters in our daily life. Each daily encounter is your chance for training and concrete practice in mercy, forgiveness, and compassion. As this love place grows within you, you will be more and more capable of knowing and loving God too. Although, to be honest, I'm not sure which comes first. Do loving people meet God, or do people who have met God know how to love? All I know is that there is eventually a major equivalence between you and the God you worship. If you are merciful, if you are a merciful, forgiving person, then I know you've met the real God. If you are narrow, stingy, and fearful, then you are worshiping something that is not God, probably some form of yourself. Words by Richard Rohr. The three key words in that reflection for me are mercy, forgiveness, and compassion. And if those three words don't also describe our Pope Francis, I don't know what three better words would. So I want to talk about those three words in reference to Pope Francis tonight and what we've seen so far in his papacy and what we've heard so far about his life before then. And I would kind of like this evening to be as much conversational as it can be. You know, I can talk. I would rather not just talk and have the center stage the whole time. I think that we all would learn from each other. I know a little bit more about Pope Francis than I used to. That's true. I certainly don't know everything there is to know about him. So if you have insights or questions or ideas that you want to throw out there for reflection or feedback from anybody that's here, I think that's the best way to learn. And so let's just have it be a round robin as much as we can. But to get started, I'll give you a few thoughts about what Francis has already said about that first word, mercy. And this is going to be my theme for tonight. It's going to be mercy. Because I truly believe that what Francis wants to do is to create a church of mercy. Well, he must think mercy is pretty important because he used that word for his first episcopal motto, whatever an episcopal motto means. I think it means how you frame and shape your ministry. His first episcopal motto was, in Latin, miserando atque elegendo. And since I don't speak Spanish or Latin, I have the meaning of that. It means making mercy and choosing to practice it. Making mercy and choosing to practice it. This is what Pope Francis chose as his words of ministry before he was Pope, when he was still a priest in Argentina. He also said later, only someone who has encountered mercy, who has been caressed by the tenderness of mercy, is happy and comfortable with the Lord. Only someone who has encountered mercy is comfortable with the Lord. That reminds me of another quote that I have heard and read by Thomas Merton. Many of you probably have read Thomas Merton. But when he was asked who God was once, he said, God is mercy within mercy within mercy. And I think that's what Pope Francis just said when he said that when you're happy, when you've encountered mercy, you can be happy and comfortable with God. What about forgiveness? It's pretty hard to distinguish sometimes between what's the difference between mercy and forgiveness. I don't know that there really is much of a difference. But one of Francis's most quoted quotes is this one about forgiveness. He said, God never tires of forgiving us, never. We are the ones who tire of asking forgiveness. He's the loving Father who always forgives and who has the heart of mercy for all of us. Mercy changes everything. We're back to mercy again. A bit of mercy makes the world less cold and more just. So he starts off talking about forgiveness, and soon he's back at forgiveness. I think that's two sides of the same coin. And the coin might be actually called compassion, because that's the third big word that I want us to know that he's about. We've already seen a pope that was full of compassion. Does anybody remember what he did in his first washing of the feet after he was made pope? He didn't just wash some feet of the people in the Vatican. No, he went down and found some, I think they were AIDS victims who were dying, and washed their feet. That's the kind of compassion he wanted to show the world. If we're washing the feet of our brothers, he went and found some of the really downtrodden. At least the men's choir is over. They were getting by without a second tenor because I was here. Anyway, so mercy, forgiveness, compassion. His overarching theme that he talks about over and over again in his papacy seems to be about a journey. And the journey he talks about most often is the journey of taking up the journey to follow Christ. And he says that it's a journey, we're moving, it's an active thing. When we're following Christ, it's an active journey. He says, once we stop moving, things go wrong. Once we stop moving, things go wrong. So he doesn't want us And this book, The Joy of the Gospel, it's all about evangelization. He actually wrote it for his priests. He wanted them to get more excited about being priests again. He said, the joy of the gospel, we should be standing up and screaming to the top of our lungs about this good news that we have heard. And he said, we just keep it so silent sometimes. It's an active journey following this Jesus Christ of ours. We shouldn't just sit back and let someone else do it. We should be doing our own evangelizing. Not an easy thing. I used to say Catholics have a really hard time with evangelizing. I don't think it's just Catholics. I think it's most Christians. I know it's not an easy thing to do, but he's, in this book, asking his priests to do it. He's asking all of us to do it. Because after all, we were all baptized in the priesthood. So, what is this message that he's giving us that seems to be resonating pretty well with the people that are hearing it? I think it's a Jesus message. The fact that he served the poor in Argentina so consistently, that was his ministry. That's what Jesus did too. I think almost everything I hear out of the mouth of Pope Francis, the quotes and stuff I read, said, this could be Jesus, I think. So it's really a Jesus message. And I think when he's giving us that kind of back to Jesus message, I think it's kind of repositioning where the church fits, if you will. You know, the Catholic Church has been for a long time very hierarchical. In fact, if you read, there's a famous book about the kinds of churches that exist in the world. Hierarchical is one of them. It is Roman Catholic to the core. It's structured, there's leaders, it's, this person is in charge of this person. Well, here's the Pope telling us it should not be hierarchical. It should not be. It is, but we should make it more than that. We should also respond to local concerns and needs. We should be able to do that, he's saying. Oftentimes in a hierarchical church, you get kind of this cookie-cutter approach to everything. Well, this is the way it needs to be done now, because this is the legal way it can happen. He's saying there are some issues that may be more localized, and there may be appropriate ways to deal with them that don't go against any Catholic teaching, but they just seem more appropriate. We should allow the bishops in those areas to have authority to do what needs to be done to serve their people. He's all about service and mercy. A lot has been said about his interreligious message. He's speaking to more than just Roman Catholics. I've heard from a lot of non-Catholic Christians that say to me, and I'm sure you have too, we really like that new Pope of yours. We love what he's saying. I think the reason they're saying that is because he's saying the Jesus message. He's even being praised by non-Christians. There's been some discussion between, well, it was actually Benedict that started this, Catholic Christians and Muslims. Benedict said we can have a cultural exchange with the Muslim community, probably not a religious exchange yet because there's just too many differences, but we could have a cultural exchange. We live on the same earth. We have to figure out how we can live together. So we should figure out a cultural exchange. Much more has been done with the Jewish community. After all, we have the Old Testament too, as do they. There's a lot more that we can do with the Jewish community in terms of our God, because we worship the same God. So there's a lot of discussion between various groups liking this new Pope, and that tells me that maybe that what Vatican II wanted to have happen in terms of ecumenism and started to happen. Remember in the early 60s when we started to have some inkling that we could go and talk to other churches now. And there was actually meetings between Protestant churches and Catholic churches, and things were happening a little bit. It kind of quit, didn't it? It hasn't been going on for quite a long time that I know of. I think
Priests and ministers still get together.
priests and ministers still get together. Yes, they probably have their monthly, I know they do this. And Trinity and St. Joseph's having Thanksgiving. But I think what I'm wondering about is the deeper kinds of things. There have been discussions between Catholics and Church of England people that seem to be going a little further than most other places. But this Pope would like those deeper conversations to start up again. And that's what Vatican II wanted to start. It kind of just got sidelined for some reason. I don't know why. So, what's left for this Pope to do? Kind of a lot. Which one was it? I think it was this book here. It has a chapter on the 10 key issues remaining for this Pope, and I put them in your handout. I'm not going to talk about all 10 of them tonight. I want to talk about a few of them. Because I'm like you, are hopeful some of these things can happen. Modernizing the Curia is in the top of the list. Now, he's already started to do that. The Curia is kind of the people that at the top that are making the decisions with the Pope on what's going to be the doctrine of the Church, the deposit of faith. What is the deposit of faith going to contain? So they're pretty significant people in our church. Well, the Pope has already appointed a permanent advisory group of 9 people, 9 high-ranking officials from 6 continents other than Europe. This is an important thing in itself. You know, this Pope was the first Pope from Latin America. He's the first Pope that wasn't from Europe in 1,000 years. He's from Latin America, where 40% of the entire population of Catholics live, and yet we've had this Eurocentric notion of things coming out of the Vatican for way too long, I think, and so does this Pope, I think, when he appointed a new group of high-ranking officials, and 6 out of the 9 are from continents other than Europe. It tells me he's looking broader. Where's the church growing? Well, Latin America, Asia. Is it growing in Europe? No. It's not growing in Europe. It's only growing in North America because of people moving in here. It's not growing in North America because churches that are existing here are getting bigger because of they're attracting other like-minded people in their communities. No, it's because people are moving in. It might be even Hispanic people, because there's certainly a large group of Catholic people there. Anyway, so the modernizing the Curia has lots of implications for it. I think it may be flattening the decision level a little bit, and maybe it will make it possible for this Pope to do what he wants to do, to empower local bishops to do more than they can do. I've already talked about rekindling evangelization. I don't think there's a lot more that I need to talk about that. But he says, instead of being a church that simply welcomes all those who seek it out, in other words, waiting for people to come and find us, instead of doing that, we need to be a church that goes beyond its walls and reaches out towards men and women who don't share in parish life, who might not even know what it is we're talking about. We need to go to them and not wait for people to come to us. Some people do come to us, and it's exciting when they do. Kathy, you in RCIA, you and I work at that program in different ways. You run it, and I just help out. But When people come that have been away from the church for a while, it's exciting. But think of how many people have never been in church, have no idea what to ask, feel it's not for them. Are they being invited? This is what the Pope is asking. The third thing on the list, and this isn't something that has to happen, but this is a new style of papacy. And it's been pretty obvious for us to all see that. It's a no-frills papacy. You know, he came out in a white cassock and a white hat. The red shoes were gone. He paid his hotel bill before he, when he was Pope, he went and paid his hotel bill before he went to the Vatican. He's just kind of like an average guy in some ways, but he's Pope. Talked a little bit already about the interfaith dialogue business and the ecumenism. Violence against Christians, that's an issue. We see it in the news almost every night. It's not just the violence against Christians, but a lot of these ISIS deaths have been Christian. I was able to sing with St. Joseph's Adult Choir. Judy, you were there too with the Nativity Choir. We did a concert not long ago at their church, and all of our songs were about peace, and there were readings by Pope Benedict. Are there a couple of popes that had readings about peace, and their priests read those, and we did this evening of reflection on the need for peace in the world, because the Nativity Choir director said, I saw in the news when ISIS tied a woman between two vehicles and had them go in opposite directions and tore her apart. And she said, this is the violence in the world that we have to at least stand up and oppose. We have to do something about it. Now, the Pope is saying the same thing. There's a lot of violence against Christians in particular. What the church is appealing for is harmonious cohabitation between Christians and Muslims, especially in the Mideast. Now, we know we're not going to be the same religiously, but we should be able to live together. We should be able to at least live together. The liberalization of morals is another issue on the list. The church is caught in the international fight between secularism or relativism and its doctrines. More than 126,000 people formally left the church in 2011 over these issues. So people are leaving the church, and it's issues like divorce and remarriage and not being able to have communion. This is a huge issue that the Pope has already started dealing with. His synod dealt with it in October, didn't come up with an answer yet, but they're at least starting to wrestle with it. They'll be meeting again in 2015, and we hope maybe some kind of a resolution can be found for it. I've heard that this issue not just from this papal conclave, I've heard it from local priests who hear it from their parishioners that are divorced and remarried and want communion and they can't have it. Now, where is the mercy in that, you might ask? Where is the compassion in that, you might ask? I think this is where the Pope is coming from on that issue. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that's where he's coming from. We need to be a compassionate and serving church. He says, let's see if I can find it. He's talking about this. There's two different ways to go with this thing. You can be a hostile rigorist in all this. In other words, this is the rule, and it was put in place for a reason, and I'm going to follow that rule because it's there. The Pope says, such a person, he said, has the desire to close inside the script and not be surprised by God. Now, how do you think, being willing to be surprised by God, I think many of us would rather write God's script than be surprised by him. Because we think we really know what God should be doing many times, don't we? I'm speaking for myself. But, we kind of know the way we want the world to be run. Can't you do it that way, God? Well, what about surprise me, God? Maybe the surprise God is waiting to give us is how we can restore this communion to these people that so desperately want it. And the other issue, the hot button issue, if you will, is the gay and lesbian issue. They didn't come to any, and the marriage issue. Now the Pope's come out pretty strong on the marriage issue. I mean, he basically says it's between a man and a woman. But again, he's got this whole issue of compassion and service to people who are different and are in relationships that may not fit that mold. What can we do? Is there anything we do? Maybe not. But he's opening up the issue for discussion with the 160 bishops that were there. There weren't enough votes to pass that yet. And the Pope was adamant on making sure that everything that failed to pass was also in the report with the vote. It's because he doesn't want to cover things up. He wants things to be out there. And I admire him for that. What the Synod, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, what the Synod will do, I read that this Pope really knows how to manage organizations too. That's one thing he learned pretty well in Argentina. He could run complex organizations, and the government in Argentina when he was Archbishop was certainly not a friend of the church. But he was able to deal with the government people who were really promoting the same-sex marriage thing. He was so opposed to it, and he opposed them. But he was able to still deal with them. This Pope is able to deal with complex organizations. So the Synod is going to be his own complex organization. How will they come out in all this? Well, I think what he's doing is he's looking for, maybe not consensus, but maybe that is what he's looking for. He's looking for insight from a lot of people before coming down and making a decision. He doesn't want to do that on his own. And the word infallibility hasn't even come up with this Pope yet, and it probably never will. Infallibility is something that's rarely used. We kind of know about this from probably our catechism days. The Pope can issue an infallible statement, and it's the truth. We have to live by it. But whenever a Pope does anything like that, there's a process they have to follow, and if they don't follow it right, man, I think it was even Humanae Vitae, when that was issued by a previous Pope, there was a lot of controversy because the process hadn't been followed. The bishops didn't feel that they had been informed about what was happening, what was the thinking that was going on before this statement came out. Well, the Pope's judging the thinking. He's asking for the thinking before he makes any decisions. He's wanting input from those key members of, the Synod, the 160 bishops, before he does anything. So I think he's being careful, but he's also not sweeping things under the rug if he thinks they need to be addressed.
Martin?
Yeah.
In the Synod, you talked about the bishop. Were the bishops the only group in the Synod?
I believe they must, I think they are, but I'm not sure, Jim. There were 190 of them at this one that just ended in October. 190 prelates is what this is calling. Are prelates bishops? I should know that, probably. As far as voting members, I'm guessing that it would have to be bishops. There might be observers there and people who were invited to speak and present, but as far as being voters, it would just be the bishops, I think.
I think the way that this Pope is operating, he will likely, whether it's a Synod format or whether it's some other representation format, I think he will begin to include all kinds of people, whether it be people in poverty, people in common walks of life, and so on, because I think he really is serious about finding out what an everyday citizen is thinking. And as you were talking earlier, I was trying to make a connection between, I was making a connection between rekindling evangelization as one of the problems, and then as one of the issues, and a new style for the Pope. And I believe, if I am reading it right, the style that I'm seeing is that he is setting an example for us of the kinds of things that he thinks ought to happen in all of our lives, every one of us. And I just had an example moments ago, and it was a belt buckle. It came loose. Couldn't find it under all those clothes. But I'm saying I think there's a connection there because we need to go out, as you said, in evangelizing rather than only letting others come to us, which is important too. So that was my connection. That is, his papacy is showing that we need to listen to more than the Curia as a group, which is my first example. And the second one is we need to also set examples. People look at all of us many times a day, and what do they see? How we act, how we do, how we carry out. Anyway.
Yeah, it's true. Good thoughts?
Is the Synod advisory in nature, or does the Synod have power?
It's advisory. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's bishops, so they certainly have power in their own diocese. But as far as making any changes like we were talking about tonight, they would not have that kind of power.
Okay, that was
Yeah.
that's what my question was.
You know, we've been talking about all of this as if it's all of our own doing, and I've been saying it in the same way. And I think I need to remind myself and read this quote. I mean, this is all from the Spirit of God. All of this that's happening. When Vatican II happened, I remember somebody telling me, it was a priest, I think, he said, well, you know, it happened, and when they weren't watching, the Holy Spirit showed up. You know? Because things happened that they didn't expect would happen. They were surprised by God. And I think that's maybe what the Synod, I'm hoping, the Synod process might have an opportunity for that. Because this is, the Pope talks about that all the time too. Be surprised by God. This is the Spirit. We were talking about, there was a quote about current conditions in the world, and there's a lot of interest in spirituality now. There's a lot of books being written on spirituality. I teach classes on occasion over at the Person in Fargo, and I have good turnouts. You know, there's lots of people that are really interested in spiritual issues. And the Pope talked about that idea that suddenly there seems to be a lot of spiritual interest out there. He says, we cannot not see this new search for the spiritual as a sign from the Spirit of God. This has to be a sign from the Spirit of God. So the Pope says. Kathy.
Being surprised by God on the evening news today. Well, there was a shooting in a university in Florida, and one student, and students were studying for midterms or for finals. Anyway, When he took the books out of his bag, he found a bullet. And it happened to be a book on theology.
Oh my goodness.
But talk about surprise by God. Do you think that's going to change his life and the life in his family?
Mhm.
Because the books were in there, he's alive.
And he said it on TV. This has to be from God.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to say it on TV and let them, I mean, the fact that they even let him say it
Mhm.
was a great thing.
That's cool. Hmm.
Has to be
Here's another quote from Francis. Today, more than ever, sainted is a journey. There's that journey notion again. Meaning that we must be truthful witnesses to what we believe in and what we love, which is quite simply crucifying. We must be true to what we believe, and that is quite simply crucifying. I have to be honest, I think I'm pretty true to what I believe, but I don't know that I ever really feel like I've been crucified for it yet. So maybe that's waiting to present itself to me. And here's another quote that I really kind of like. Today our fight against atheism is called the fight against theism. You know what he means by that? There's kind of a lot of false religion out there in the world. I think that's what he's saying. You know, there's a lot of religion that's making itself up as it goes. It feels good about what it says and does. But is it really the gospel message for us Christians? I think I see a lot of that feel-good kind of stuff. It bothers me. So, I kind of skipped a lot of those issues. I skipped over the worldwide economic crisis. We talked about his preferential treatment for the poor. He also comes out pretty hard against capitalism, which you would expect, because he's seen what capitalism can do to people in his home country of Argentina. So, we've talked a lot about this synod. Is that where we will find answers, do you think? It's going to be another year. I was telling my wife, I think we're going to hear something really big on the next Divine Mercy Sunday. And I said, when is that? And it was like just a Sunday or two after he was named Pope. So it's going to be sometime in October?
It's the week, Sunday after Easter.
Sunday after Easter? Okay. Well, it could still be. There won't be a synod. It won't happen until after that. So it won't be next Divine Mercy Sunday, but maybe the Divine Mercy Sunday after that we might hear something. I don't know. It's just my funny prediction. He seems to be such a person that talks about the importance of mercy in everybody's life. But this synod, in its first year, it kind of surprised people a little bit. It took a middle path. I think maybe some people were expecting the Pope would want it to move quicker than it did. It found a middle path between doctrine and reality. And this is good. This Pope is not avoiding doctrine. I mean, the deposit of faith of the Church will be maintained. But even in that maintenance of that doctrine of faith, when we have issues like the divorce and remarriage communion issue, where does mercy fit in? So we got to figure out how can those two things live together. You know, there's a phrase that I heard all the time when I was going back to school. It's called the Catholic both and. It's not an either or in Catholicism. It's a both and. These two things can live together in the same room. They may look like they oppose each other. Actually, they complement each other. So, if we have strong doctrine and a need for mercy in these situations, there may be a way for both of those things to happen without compromising either. But it takes some pretty creative thinking and some pretty creative praying, I think, and a lot of hard work by the Holy Spirit. Oh boy. The task of the Pope is to guarantee the unity of the church, to remind pastors that their first duty is to feed the flock that the Lord has entrusted to him, and try to search to welcome with fatherhood and mercy and without false fears the lost sheep. Then he said, I made a mistake. I said, welcome. Go find them. Yeah, it's not enough to welcome. Go find them. So, there's a whole NCR article about Francis's sense of mercy. I've talked a lot about that tonight. It says that he's led, that his witnessing the lives of ordinary people, absorbing their hopes and hard times and their brokenness, has led him to a theology of mercy and forgiveness. He's also a Jesuit. Jesuits were started by Ignatius. So Ignatian spirituality is a very important thing for him. I took my book, The Jesuit's Guide to Almost Anything, and I was going to look up what it had to say about mercy. That's the almost anything it doesn't talk about. I don't know. It's not in there. But anyway, this writer talks about Ignatian spirituality. She told the audience it's a spirituality for everyday life. This is his training. His spirituality is a spirituality for everyday life. It has humanism at the heart and respects people's everyday experiences. It reflects and discerns as it attempts to understand. It sees the work of God in all things, she said. It finds contemplation in action. That contemplation in action is the theme of Ignatius. Any Jesuit will be trained in contemplation and action. They study for years and years. And one of the first things they do after they're done studying is to go work in really a poor country, to work with really poor people. Because all of this years of contemplation has to result in something. I think the author of that book went and spent time with Mother Teresa's people in India. That was where he went. So you can see where he's coming from in his training, in his life work in Argentina, and now in the Vatican, where he's the top dog. But what a humble one, I think. So, I haven't even talked for an hour, but I feel like I've talked almost long enough. But this was the third of three. What did you wish you would have had a chance to talk about in these 3 sessions that maybe you didn't? Or what, is there anything that you would like to know more about? Not that I'm going to know it, but somebody here might. Or what do you feel, or how do you know this new Pope different, do you think, after the 3 sessions you've had here, or don't you? And why does it matter?
I think because you can relate to him. He's one of us. I mean, he just seems more like he's one of us. He's trying to do the same things we do. He's not the hierarchical, isn't there for him. I mean, he doesn't want the special treatment. He doesn't want those things. And I think that's just really come out in his stand on treat. I mean, washing the feet of the AIDS, like, that struck me right away, immediately when I read about that, I heard about that.
In his book, The Joy of the Gospel, he really talks about, evangelizing, and not to do it in a somber, but we should truly be joyful. If we don't look like we're joyful, who would want to become one of us? And so there's a lot of upbeat in that, but then later he really challenges what we should be doing. Not just doing nothing, but we're to go out and reach people, some of what you had said. He challenges us to not live comfortably, but to go out and seek people and go out to other places.
Mhm.
He's pretty blunt about it in some areas.
He's pretty blunt about it,
Yeah.
which we sometimes need to hear and be, don't we?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think he's a pope that truly lives what he preaches. That he doesn't just say we should do this. I mean, he actually goes by example and shows that mercy, shows that forgiveness in everything that he does. And he really touches the average person. I mean, you feel like you know him, I know him more now, but you know him no more as one of us than somebody that sits up, on a throne and just delegates, what we
Right.
should be and shouldn't be doing.
He could do anything he wanted to, but he sort of does it himself. I mean, you have anyone do things for him if he wanted them to.
Today in the news, they said that he put showers outside of the Vatican for the homeless to shower, and he's selling off all the gifts he was given when he became Pope. They said other popes, they ended up in warehouses, but he's selling it all online or something.
Wow.
Selling chances.
Yeah.
Earn money to give to the
And all the
poor.
money,
Give to the poor.
well, yeah, and in order to even put a bid, don't you have to pay $12.50?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it's like big.
Well, when his family and friends from Argentina wanted to come when he was going to be installed as Pope, he said, save your money, give it to the poor. He didn't want them to spend money on airplane tickets to come and see him. So, yeah, he puts his money where the mouth goes.
I think it's been interesting to see that about every month you read about someone in the hierarchy that's been demoted or their job has changed.
Mhm.
And his most recent one was the person that was the very, very conservative bishop who led the charge not to pass the things that were proposed regarding marriage and
Right.
whatever. And
Bert?
that person really kind of lost his job.
Yeah, he's
You know what I
got a
mean?
job, but
But he
not,
wasn't the only one. There have
Yeah.
been previous ones, which is kind of interesting because as time passes, certainly those things will have an impact on where church is going, and that's not really not a faith issue, but in a sense, it's a management issue, which I don't remember folks doing before. It's kind of,
and we didn't hear about it if they did, right?
well, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe they,
Maybe I wasn't looking for it as much before.
well, or maybe the media wasn't, because now
Well,
the
that's
media
true.
is covering this pope probably
Well, that
more
could
than they've covered other popes.
We
'Cause,
have
yeah,
to be careful what we read in the general media, because sometimes they pick just bits that they want out of the bigger picture.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think that's maybe part of his plan, is to really lay a foundation first, indicating what it is that he truly believes his life and our lives should be like. And I can remember it's one of the first actions relating to what Rose was just saying, was a bishop in Germany
Oh, yeah.
who lived in this beautiful mansion. And after he which, that's the foundation. I mean, the action that you take, and as each one of these takes place, I'm thinking of the word that you just said, which was compassion, or excuse me, contemplation. And we are contemplating what all of this means right at the moment by the examples you gave and others have given. And based on what this Pope is showing us about life, his life. And I don't think he's hurried off to do any quick changes, whether it be with the role of women in the church, or whether it be any other kinds of changes. There hasn't been, and I think there are people in the press, as Kathy was just talking about, who are awfully impatient, and they would love to see a report on something. This guy's really going to do this and this. I think he's wise by taking his time to give us what it is that foundation level best would be for all of us.
And he's not a young man, so that's something that people are a little concerned about too. But he's laying a foundation that, if it's laid, will last longer than, maybe longer than even his papacy will last. Who knows? None of us know that.
In the National Catholic Register, they reported that at the synod, after the synod was over, he chastised those who came with a liberal agenda and those who came with a very conservative agenda. He said that he was kind of angry about the extremes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got that article, or an article similar to that as well. So he found a middle of the road position somehow that seems to be able to work for him, and maybe for more of them.
Even though he's not a young man, any change he makes is laying that foundation, and laying and fitting to the precedent that hasn't been around. It may have been in the early years, but it hasn't been around for a while. And those things are going to be hard to change back. Not that it may not happen, but it's going to be hard to change back. And so anything he does is really change. And it's going to extend into the future for some length of time. And that's probably why he's not in that hurry, because he knows that any change he makes is going to be harmful.
That's true, and when Pope Benedict was elected, Francis was the second. He got 40 votes or something then. He didn't get enough to become Pope, but he got quite a few. So that's telling me that these thoughts, this kind of way of thinking was going on among the cardinals back then too. And then it seems to have continued with his election, and maybe there's just a sea change going on. This is where we need to be thinking more than we have in the past. So that will keep it going.
Yeah.
That will keep it going. Unless, you got to remember, this is the work of the Spirit. You can't take credit for it. Well, I think we Catholics, I'm sensing that we're pretty pleased with what we've seen so far in this papacy. And I know that we're hopeful for more. We probably all have different hopes, which is fine, should. But we will hope that it's the Spirit that's guiding the whole process, that it will end up where it needs to end. Other thoughts?
You were talking about his theme of mercy. Brendan Case was here for 2 nights this last week, and what he really wanted to emphasize was God is a merciful and loving God. Right? And he just mentioned that many times. We want people to realize and to know and to share God is merciful and loving. That's the two gifts he gives us. That's what he talked about, two gifts.
And Father talked about that at baptism on Sunday too, the gift of mercy.
Mhm. We're getting it. But we just have to be told it a lot.
And you know, you think a lot of the people who are struggling and who maybe did a lot of things they shouldn't have done, to be told and to know that God's a merciful God would certainly help draw them, or would certainly give them hope or courage. Because if you've done a lot of bad things and you're really feeling rotten about yourself, and where do you go? But to know that God's forgiving and loving, and you can work at turning your life around because God loves you.
Mhm.
And maybe that's a message we need to share with a lot more people.
And that's what Bob said. God never tires of forgiving us. We just get tired of asking.
There was one of those CDs back there. It was an abortionist from, I think, New York. I don't know how many thousands he had aborted, but he became friends of a Catholic priest, and he gradually realized what he was doing was wrong, and he looked for where he could find the most mercy, and at the end he says, there's no greater mercy than in the Catholic Church, so he became Catholic.
Wow.
With the sacrament of confession and forgiveness. But he said a lot of Catholics don't realize that.
No. Yes.
I think that one of the things Pope is trying to tell us is that we need to be one-on-one kind of people, that we need to evangelize, show mercy, show love, not in big groups, but with a little person that you see here or there, and do a one-on-one kind of thing without reward. Just be loving and kind and spread the word. I think that's part, I think he's showing that by example, and I think if we want a practical thing that we as individuals should take home from all of this, is to do that.
That's good. I think so.
And you find that you can look for it, but it'll come to you too. Twice in the last 3 weeks. Someone in our group or ourselves have been approached by a homeless person here. And one of them, in both cases, in one case they wanted food and a ride to a homeless shelter. The other case, they just needed a ride to the homeless shelter. But they're all over the place. I mean, you think you have to go looking for them, and they're right in our backyard. So you just have to be open.
Mm-hmm. It's been weird.
Sometimes it's not just the poor, but it's the poor in spirit.
Right.
Vern, when you were reading from Richard Rohr's teaching there in the very first part of the presentation, there was something that made me go back and back and back and think. And I believe that's fodder for contemplation. And it's kind of in the middle of the statement. It says, although to be honest, I'm not sure which one comes first. Do loving people meet God? Or do people who have met God know how to love? It's, I think, an example of it's not yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this or that.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably a little bit for a lot of both. And you can come at it from either side, from either direction. So, loving people do meet God, as you were just saying. And they may be homeless.
Right.
Maybe God there in them. Or do people who have met God know how to love? Well, I think they do. But it's that combination that needs to keep us thinking and focused and doing.
And that's another very individual thing, just like you were talking about, doing individual acts of kindness for people that we may come across, those encounters. That's what Rose is suggesting, that may be what the Pope wants each one of us to be doing, those individual encounters. And that's what, in those loving encounters, that's when we will know God. Maybe we will reflect God too. Well, I don't think I have anything more that I know that I want to put, except I have some flyers. If anybody's interested in them, I'm teaching a class next spring at the Prayer Center. I brought some flyers if you want to take one home with you. Using a book by Henry Nouwen for that one, another one of my favorites. And it's called Discerning My Path. It's kind of like what we do with all of our life, isn't it? Okay, anything else? If not, I retyped the same prayer that we used when Monsignor Krebs was here, the prayer for the Pope, and there are some typos in it, so you're going to have to just kind of ignore them. They're kind of odd. Or maybe I got yours right. Almighty is spelled right on my copy. Maybe I found them before I had Kathy print these out. Anyway, why don't we take? Pardon me?
We'll meet you in the middle.
Meet you in the middle? Okay, all right. We'll do it. Anyway, let's pray together the prayer on the back of that handout. Lord Jesus Christ, we ask your abundant blessings on our spiritual leader, Pope Francis. Send your Holy Spirit upon him, that he may be a brother to all of his faithful, and a true servant to Almighty God. Strengthen him daily to complete the immense duties of the Church with grace and compassion. Allow him to be a humble leader who strives to bring peace, justice, and truth into our world. Above all, bestow upon our Holy Father your gifts of faith, hope, and love, so that he unceasingly proclaims your holy name. Mother Mary, all the holy angels and saints of God, we ask you to guide Pope Francis this day and always. Amen. Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you. Thanks, Sean, for organizing this for all of us.